She walked away from a loveless marriage without any money, until a disaster forced him to beg for her return. She had walked away with nothing, not a coin, not a title, not even the dignity she once carried as lightly as breath. But Lady Marian Ashford did not look back. The morning she left Ravenshade Keep, she carried only a wool cloak, a single dress, and a heart that had learned to bleed in silence. Her marriage had died long before she stepped through those iron doors, but the world would say she abandoned her husband. They would say she had failed him. They would whisper that she was ungrateful, stubborn, too proud to be a proper wife. Only Marianne knew the truth. You cannot abandon what was never yours. Her husband, Lord Roderick Ashford, had given her a ring but nothing else. Not affection, not warmth, not even basic regard. He had treated her as a duty, a political alliance, a name to sign beside his. For years she tried to bridge the distance. She tried to bring life into a home built from stone and colder stone. She tried to be gentle with a man who did not understand gentleness. But some wounds can't be healed by trying. The final night of their marriage still played in her mind like a fated tragedy. She remembered standing in their chambers, her hands trembling as she held the last of her belongings. Roderick had stood by the window, arms crossed, shadows cutting harsh lines across his face. "If you wish to leave," he said, "leave. I will not stop you. I will not chase after you." Not once did he ask why. Not once did he ask what pain had driven her to this. Not once did he speak her name with softness. So she nodded, bowed her head, and answered with the only thread of dignity she had left. "I wish you well, my lord." He said nothing. The silence was a farewell colder than steel. And so she walked away. Down the stairs. Through the gate. Into a world that did not know her, did not care for her, yet offered something her husband never did. Possibility. But freedom came at a cost. Marianne soon learned that a woman who leaves her noble husband becomes a story. Villagers whispered. Merchants stared. Inns that once welcomed the wife of Lord Ashford now charged her twice the price after recognizing her face. Rumors spread faster than winter frost. Some said she had run off with a lover. Others claimed she had stolen gold from the keep. A few wondered if she had lost her mind. No one guessed the truth, that she had simply run out of reasons to stay alive inside that marriage. With no fortune, no family, and no power, Marianne wandered from village to village. She worked where she could, stitching torn hems, mending blankets, tending to children for a few copper coins. She slept in attics, barns, and once, beneath the awning of an abandoned mill while rain soaked her shoes. But she did not break. Every morning she woke with the same quiet resolve. I will make a life of my own. A life that hurts less than the one I left. Months passed, seasons changed, and slowly, Marianne gathered the pieces of her shattered life and began to rebuild. She found small kindnesses in unexpected places. A baker who offered stale bread at the end of the day, an old widow who taught her to mix healing herbs, a stable boy who let her sleep near the warmth of the horses when frost crept beneath the doors. Piece by fragile piece, she began to carve a place for herself in the world. What she did not know, what she could not have imagined, was that fate was carrying her in a slow, inevitable circle. Because far away, in the stone corridors of Ravenshade, disaster was coming. A disaster that would break Lord Roderick's pride. A disaster that would bring him to his knees. A disaster that would force the man who once let her walk away without blinking, to beg for her return. And only then would he understand the truth Marianne had known from the start. When a woman walks away from a loveless marriage, she does not lose everything. She begins anew, and sometimes, the one who took her for granted becomes the one who can no longer live without her. She left with nothing. Not because she wanted to, but because staying had become the slowest way to die. Lady Alara Winfell, once the Duchess of one of the richest territories in the Northern Kingdom, walked away from her marriage with only the clothes on her back and a single trunk of belongings that held no real value, at least not to anyone but her. People whispered that a woman who abandoned a duke must be foolish, that leaving without money, titles, or protection was madness, that the duke's estate, wealth, and influence were worth enduring a loveless marriage for. But those people had never lived inside a heart that had been hollowed out piece by piece. They had never watched a husband become a stranger. They had never slept beside a man whose eyes held more ice than the winter outside their windows. They had never endured the pain of being invisible in their own home. The truth was far more tragic and far more quiet than the gossip spreading across the kingdom. Alara didn't leave for scandal, greed, or revenge. She left because nothing remained inside her. The Duke of Ravensmere, Dorian Veilheart, had married her for alliances, appearances, and convenience. He never raised his voice, never struck her, never humiliated her in public. His cruelty had a different face: indifference. For 3 long years, every word she spoke fell into the silence between them. Every effort she made to create a home was met with distance. She wore the finest gowns, hosted the finest gatherings, played the dutiful wife. Yet every night, the other side of the bed remained cold. He didn't resent her. He didn't desire her. He simply didn't feel anything at all. And Alara, once bright, curious, full of life, slowly folded into herself like a wilting flower hidden in the shadows. Until the morning she woke up, looked into the mirror, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. That was the day she packed a trunk. She didn't leave a letter. She didn't ask for money. She didn't beg for affection. She simply walked out through the castle gates with her head held high, even though her heart trembled inside her chest. Dorian didn't chase her. He didn't call out her name. He didn't even appear at the gate to watch her leave. And so Alara told herself that if the man she married didn't care whether she stayed or left, then he didn't deserve to know where she went next. She boarded a merchant wagon heading toward the coast. No jewels, no servants, no escort. Just a woman trying to remember how to breathe in a world that had forgotten her. The small fishing village of Brindlehaven welcomed her without questions. The people there didn't care about titles or noble pedigrees. They knew nothing of dukes or alliances. They only saw a quiet, graceful woman who worked hard, learned quickly, and treated everyone with kindness. And slowly, painfully but beautifully, Alara rebuilt herself. She learned to mend nets. She sold herbs at the local market. She helped raise a widow's children. She planted a small garden behind the cottage she rented. Her hands, once soft and unused to labor, became strong. Her smile, once rare and tentative, returned in small pieces, and by the 2nd year, Brindlehaven no longer saw her as a noblewoman hiding from a broken marriage. She was simply Alara, one of them, a woman who carried her secrets with quiet dignity and never complained about the weight of them. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that miles away, in the cold marble halls of Ravensmere, disaster was creeping toward the man she once called husband. And when it finally struck, when his world shattered as easily as hers once had, the proud Duke Dorian Veilheart would realize the truth he had ignored for too long. He needed her. He always had. And now, for the first time in his life, he would have to beg for the woman who had walked away without a single coin, but with every piece of his quiet, unspoken heart. The morning after Marianne left the Duke's manor, the world continued as if she had never existed, and that was the cruelty that hurt the most. The castle did not slow, the servants did not whisper her name, and the man she had once called husband did not send a single rider after her. She had walked away, expecting, foolishly, that someone would notice the absence of the woman who had held that household together for 5 long, loveless years. But the silence was absolute. Marianne spent her first night in the abandoned mill on the edge of the river, a place once used for grain storage but long forgotten after the floods had torn part of its wheel away. She wrapped her thin shawl around her shoulders and reminded herself that she had chosen this. She had chosen freedom over pride, dignity over convenience, truth over comfort. And yet, lying on the cold floor with only the sound of the running water outside, she wondered if freedom was supposed to feel so much like abandonment. But dawn brought resolve. The same resolve she had carried in her heart the day she married Edmund, Duke of Haldenburg, the resolve to endure what others could not. She walked to the village with her chin lifted, even though her dress was still the same one she had worn when she walked away from her marriage, with nothing but the clothes on her back. Villagers stared, some with curiosity, others with pity, a few with the malicious delight that only small communities can harbor when the mighty fall. She ignored them all. By midday, she had found work scrubbing tables at the old inn. Hard work, the owner had said, unfit for noble hands. "Then I will learn," Marianne replied. And she did. She burned her palms, scraped her knuckles, and washed dishes until her arms trembled. But every plate she cleaned felt like another chain broken. Weeks turned into months. The villagers grew used to seeing her there. The once duchess who now tied her hair with simple cloth, who carried buckets of water and scrubbed soot from stone floors. Some mocked her behind her back. Others slowly began to respect her. She learned to stretch coins, to mend her own dresses, to fix a leaking roof, to light the inn's ovens before dawn. She learned the sharp bite of hunger, the strength of exhaustion, and the quiet pride of honest work. Marianne no longer flinched when she looked at her hands and saw the calluses forming. These were the hands of a survivor. Yet, even as she built this new life, she could not escape the memories of her old one, the cold halls of Haldenburg, the empty dining room where she had waited for a man who never came, the nights she had cried silently, careful not to be heard, ashamed that she still hoped Edmund might someday look at her like a wife, rather than an obligation. But Edmund had never looked, and so she had walked away. What she did not know was that, far from the village, in the stone manor she once called home, the foundations of Edmund's life were beginning to crack. While Marianne scrubbed tables and slept in the inn's dusty upper room, the Duke faced rising debts, failing crops, and a spreading rumor that the crown questioned his loyalty after the disappearance of several shipments meant for the royal treasury. He was a man accustomed to control, but for the first time in many years, control was slipping, and the first truly devastating blow had yet to fall. But it would, and when it did, it would send Edmund to the very place he had forgotten, seeking the one person whose absence had begun to haunt the echoing halls of Haldenburg, the wife he had let walk away without a word. Because some disasters strip a man of pride. Some disasters force him to see truth. And some disasters leave him with only one choice: beg the woman he once ignored to save him. The weeks that followed my departure were quiet for me, and catastrophic for him. I learned of it only through whispered rumors, carried by traveling merchants and old servants, who still pitied the Duke despite everything he had done. While I scrubbed floors in an apothecary shop to earn the coins needed to keep myself fed, the world he had taken for granted began to rot from the inside. At first, it was only a tremor in the grand house of Hawthorne Keep, a single trade deal falling through, a minor noble withdrawing support, a shipment of grain spoiled in the docks. But these small losses were threads, and once pulled, the entire fabric of his stability began to unravel. The Duke had always believed himself invincible. He thought loyalty was purchased by rank, that fear ensured obedience, and that wealth naturally replenished itself. He had no idea how much of his empire had been silently held together by the woman he dismissed as useless. Me, his forgotten wife. I had spent years tending to alliances he ignored, smoothing over insults he delivered without thought, paying debts he forgot existed, keeping servants content, and merchants loyal. I had patched his world like a seamstress repairing a garment whose owner believed it mended itself. So when I left, the seams burst open, all at once. Word spread quickly. The Duke had insulted the Earl of Westmore during a feast, and without me to soothe the offense, the Earl withdrew the grain supply that fed half our lands. The Duchess of Trenton, once my closest confidant, rejected his request for financial assistance, openly claiming she would not support a man who cast out a good woman for sport. And then came the storm, a literal one. A violent tempest crashed against the coast, destroying 3 of his largest merchant ships, sinking fortunes into the sea. The loss was devastating, not only financially, but politically. Those ships had carried not only goods, but promises now broken, leaving him vulnerable to every noble he had ever treated with arrogance. He sent messengers to speak with me. I ignored them. He sent coin. I returned it. He sent apologies. I burned them. But the night everything truly collapsed, that part I only came to know later, long after the turning point had already been sealed. It began on the night the storm broke. Rain slammed against Hawthorne Keep so violently that the guards claimed it sounded like stones. The Duke paced his war room, his hair wet from riding through the storm earlier, his boots leaving muddy prints across the floor. Before him lay a mountain of letters, all bearing bad news, all confirming what he refused to admit. He was losing everything. And the only person who could have saved him was the woman he'd cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back. Witnesses later said they had never seen him like that, a proud man unraveling, a commander with no army left to command, a king without a kingdom. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the candle stands. "Where is she?" he demanded, voice hoarse. "Someone must know." But no one knew. And even if they had, none would dare say it. When the storm reached its height, a messenger arrived at the keep, soaked to the bone, clutching a single letter sealed with the royal crest. The Duke tore it open with trembling fingers. He expected the king's support. What he found instead was a decree demanding immediate repayment of his debts I had once secretly covered with my own inheritance. The fire in the hearth flickered dangerously, as if the storm itself wanted to witness his downfall. Then, according to the servants, he read the final line aloud, voice breaking. "Your estranged wife was always the stabilizing force behind Hawthorne. Without her, the crown cannot guarantee your competence." He sank into the nearest chair, as if struck. His hands shook. His breath faltered. For the first time in our marriage, he understood that losing me had consequences far beyond loneliness. He had lost the one thing he never valued, the foundation beneath his feet. And while he sat in the ruins of the life he destroyed with his own hands, I slept peacefully in my tiny rented room above the apothecary, unaware that the man who once sent me away with cold indifference was now crumbling under the weight of his choices. What neither of us knew yet was this: fate was preparing the moment when our paths would collide again. But not as husband and wife, as supplicant and savior. The first night of freedom Arya did not look back. Not at the towering stone walls she once called home. Not at the iron gates that had closed behind her with a final, echoing thud. Not even at the marriage that had drained the life from her day by day. She walked with the quiet desperation of someone who had survived too much and expected nothing more from the world than the right to breathe. The wind was sharp against her face, carrying the scent of rain and the distant hum of the marketplace. Her dress, though plain, felt lighter without the weight of noble jewels. Her ring finger, once a symbol of duty, burned with a phantom ache where her wedding band had been. She had left it on the Duke's desk like a discarded name. With each step, she felt something unfamiliar creeping in. Not hope, but space. Space to think, to feel, to exist without being watched, judged, or silenced. Her marriage had been built on duty, not affection. The Duke, Lord Rowan Hawthorne, had treated her with the cold politeness of a man fulfilling a royal obligation. He was respected, feared, admired, yet utterly unreachable. There were nights when Arya had wondered if a statue made of marble would offer more warmth than her husband ever had. She walked for hours, past villages where children stared and women whispered. Her name still carried weight, but stripped of wealth and status, she was simply a woman alone with nothing but a small satchel and a heart stitched together by endurance. By dusk, she reached a modest inn on the edge of the forest. The innkeeper, a round woman with kind eyes, did not ask questions when Arya paid with the last of her coin. She simply offered a warm bowl of soup and a quiet room upstairs. Arya sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the wooden frame creaking beneath her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without fear of being overheard. The silence was unfamiliar, almost frightening. She held her own hands, tracing the marks of a life lived in restraint. When the rain began to fall, she opened the window and let the cold air wash over her. She whispered to the night, "I don't know what comes next, but I will not break." The following morning, Arya sought work. She had never been trained in labor. Noble-born daughters were raised to embroider, read poetry, host guests, and sit quietly beside powerful men. But she was clever, diligent, and unafraid of effort. The townsfolk were suspicious at first. A noble woman working? Impossible. Yet she persisted. She assisted the healer with herbs, helped the baker knead dough, carried water for the blacksmith's wife. Anything that let her earn a coin with dignity. Weeks passed, and whispers softened into acceptance. For the first time, people looked at her not as a title, but as a person. She laughed with the market women, listened to stories by candlelight, and learned the rhythm of life unburdened by expectations. But even freedom had shadows. At night, Rowan's face haunted her thoughts, not with longing, but with the unresolved ache of a woman who had never been seen by the man who vowed to protect her. She wondered if he noticed her absence, if he felt even the slightest tremor of guilt. She doubted it. Back in the Hawthorne estate, Rowan moved through his duties with the same rigid discipline he always had. The kingdom saw him as a leader forged in steel, but no one knew the truth. He handled emotions as one would handle fire. Carefully, at arm's length, afraid of being burned. When Arya left, he told himself she would return. Noble women always did. Where else could she go? What life could she build without rank, gold, or protection? He did not understand that she had chosen something he never could give her: self-worth. Yet fate has a way of waiting in silence before it strikes. And soon, a disaster would shake the Hawthorne estate to its foundations. Something so devastating that Rowan's world would collapse without warning. Only then would he learn the price of taking love for granted. Only then would he understand that the woman he let walk away was the only one who had ever held the power to save him. The weeks after Alara left Ravenshade Manor dragged on like a winter that refused to thaw. The servants whispered about her disappearance. The townsfolk speculated about the Duke's marriage collapsing, and the kingdom watched quietly as if waiting for a storm to break. But no one felt the weight of her absence more than Duke Rowan Thorne, though he would sooner die than admit it. He had expected to feel relief when she walked away. After all, hadn't he convinced himself that their marriage was nothing more than a political obligation? Hadn't he told himself for years that he owed her nothing? Not affection, not comfort, not even conversation. But the silence she left behind was not the usual cold quiet that he wrapped himself in like armor. This silence was sharp, invasive, accusatory. It scraped the inside of his ribs every time he drew breath. For the first time in years, Rowan walked the halls without purpose, without direction. He paused in doorways he had never stepped through, lingered near windows he never cared to look out of. He wandered the manor like a man trapped in a place he built with his own hands, and only now realized had become his prison. And everywhere he turned, she was missing. Her chair by the west balcony stood empty. The kitchen no longer smelled of the warm spices she loved. The gardens, once tended by her gentle hands, had already begun to wilt at the edges. Rowan tried to ignore it, tried to drown himself in the endless duties of a duke, but even the council noticed the shift in him. He was more irritable, quicker to anger, and strangely distracted during meetings. One afternoon, when the treasurer presented the quarterly reports, Rowan stared so long at a single sheet of parchment that the man cleared his throat 3 times before the duke even blinked. "My lord, is something the matter?" "No," Rowan snapped, even though something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. Elara had taken nothing with her. No jewelry, no clothes, no coin. She slipped away from Ravenshade with only the dress on her back and the quiet dignity of someone who finally understood how much she'd lost by staying. Rowan told himself he didn't care. She was free to do as she pleased. He owed her nothing. But late at night, when the manor was still and the moonlight cast pale shadows on stone, Rowan found himself tormented by a single question. Where had she gone? He had treated her unfairly. That much he could no longer deny. Elara had always looked at him with cautious hope. Hope he rejected without mercy. He saw her softness as weakness, her kindness as an inconvenience, her attempts at closeness as burdens he didn't ask for. Every time she reached for him, he pulled away, retreating deeper into the walls he built, long before she entered his life. Now she was gone, and those walls felt suffocating. On the 3rd week of her absence, a messenger arrived from the capital, a royal seal pressed into crimson wax. Rowan broke it with a careless flick, but the words inside stole the breath from his lungs. A plague had swept through the northern villages. It was spreading fast, and Ravenshade was next. The council convened at once. Panic filled the room, though no one dared say the word plague out loud. Rowan's mind raced as the advisors spoke, but every thought led him back to the same truth. Elara was gone, unprotected, without coin or shelter. If the sickness reached her, if she fell ill, no one would care. No one would help. She wasn't his duchess anymore. She wasn't anyone anymore. Rowan slammed his palm onto the table, silencing the room. "We ride at dawn," he ordered. "Every healer, every cart, every supply wagon. We seal the manor and protect the people. I will lead the effort myself." The council exchanged stunned looks. The Duke never led anything personally. The Duke never risked himself. But Rowan didn't care about protocol. A single truth pulsed in his veins with terrifying clarity. He had finally driven away the only person who ever loved him. And now death might reach her before he could make it right. That night, he stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom, the wind cold and sharp against his skin. He closed his eyes, his voice barely a whisper carried by the wind. "Elara, where are you?" He didn't realize that for the first time in his life, he was praying. The news reached Marianne late in the morning, carried not by a messenger, but by the trembling whispers of the villagers who gathered at her modest doorway. A fire had swept through Highmore Castle, devouring the west wing and collapsing 2 of the main towers. Entire storage rooms, archives, and the Duke's treasury had turned to ash overnight. Servants had fled in panic. Families from the estate arrived seeking refuge with nothing but the clothes on their backs. She listened in silence as the stories spilled out like broken pottery, each detail worse than the last. The Duke's name surfaced in every hushed sentence, always trembling at the edges. He had survived, but barely. The accounts described him wandering the courtyard at dawn, covered in ash, staring at the ruins as if his soul had burned with the stone. Marianne felt nothing at first. No shock, no triumph, no vindication. She simply stood, her hands resting on the wooden table of her tiny cottage, trying to understand why her chest felt so tight. The man she had left behind, the man who had abandoned her emotionally long before she ever walked away, was now facing devastation on a scale she could hardly comprehend. And yet, he was still the man who had never loved her. That truth grounded her. Still, as the day passed and more survivors arrived at her door seeking water, warmth, or a place to rest, she worked tirelessly. She cooked, she bandaged wounds, she let children sleep in her bed while she remained awake tending the hearth. It was instinct, not affection. It was who she had always been. But the moment she saw the Duke himself appear at the threshold of her small cottage, all the air left her lungs. He looked like a ghost. His once perfect hair was matted with soot. His fine clothes were charred and torn. His hands shook as if he had just crawled out of his own grave. The proud posture she remembered, rigid, cold, untouchable, was gone. He stood hunched, broken by something far heavier than stone. When their eyes met, his lips parted, but no words came out. Marianne did not rush to him. She did not reach out. She simply watched, waiting to understand why fate had brought this ruined man to her doorstep. Finally, with a breath that rattled in his chest, he said the words she never imagined he could form. "Marianne, I have nowhere else to go." The cottage fell silent around them. Even the fire seemed to shrink, as if afraid to interrupt. For a heartbeat, she allowed herself to see him. Not as the man who had neglected her, not as the husband who had once taken her presence for granted, but as a human being standing on the edge of despair. And still, she did not move. He swallowed hard, his voice cracking as he tried again. "Please, help me." Marianne looked at him, at the ash clinging to his hair, the tremor in his fingers, the shame in his eyes, and she felt a storm begin to form inside her. Not pity, not love, something deeper, something she had never been allowed to feel while she was his wife. Power. For the first time in their entire marriage, he needed her. Not for duty, not for propriety, not for appearances, for survival. She stepped aside slowly, letting him enter the cottage. He hesitated, as if unsure whether he deserved to cross the threshold. But she said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more truth than any vow they had ever exchanged. When he finally stepped inside, she closed the door behind him, not as a wife welcoming a husband home, but as a woman deciding the terms of the future herself. Whatever came next, it would not resemble the life she left behind. And the Duke, he knew it too. He had come to her not as a lord, not as a husband, but as a man stripped bare of everything he once used to keep her small. Marianne lifted her chin. For the first time, she would decide what he was worth. There are moments in life when a single sound can split a world in half. For Rowan, it was the crack of the southern dam collapsing under the weight of the storm. The dam he had ignored, the warnings he had dismissed, the repairs he had postponed. The dam that Elena had begged him to reinforce months before he cast her aside. He had not slept in 2 days when the messenger burst into his war room drenched, breathless, and shaking with terror. "My lord, the river swallowed the lower valley. Families are stranded on rooftops. The grain reserves, they're gone." Rowan squeezed his eyes shut. Casualties? Too many to count. He had always believed himself capable, unyielding, sharp-minded, the kind of man who could rule on instinct alone. But now instinct had betrayed him. Or perhaps it had simply revealed the truth. He had driven away the only voice that dared contradict him. The only voice that had warned him. Elena. He tried to push her name away, but it pressed against his skull like a blade. She had walked out of his gates with nothing but a shawl, a small pack of food, and her dignity. He had watched her walk away believing it was her fault. Now every street, every ruined field, Every crying villager whispered the same accusation. You sent away the one person who could have saved us. Rain hammered the castle roof as Rowan made his way to the battlements. Below, the kingdom looked like a wounded beast, broken, gasping, drowning. People needed food, medicine, organization, hope. But he had no idea where to begin. He stared into the storm, gripping the stone wall until his knuckles whitened. Where do I even start? A soft voice behind him answered, with humility. It wasn't her voice. His heart lurched nonetheless. When Rowan turned, he found his grandmother, Lady Isolde, frail but wise, leaning on her cane. You look surprised, she said bitterly. Did you think failure would leave you alone? He swallowed hard. The valley, it's worse than we thought. And whose fault is that? Her eyes, usually gentle, pierced him. I warned you. Elena warned you, but you silenced the one voice that cared for more than your pride. He had no defense, only breath that refused to fill his lungs. His grandmother stepped closer. Rowan, listen to me carefully. There is only one person in this kingdom who could manage a crisis like this. One who worked beside the common folk while you hid behind paperwork. One who saw danger before you did. He met her gaze, and the truth struck him with all the force of the storm. You want me to bring her back, he whispered. Lady Isolde's voice softened, not with pity, but with the urgency of someone speaking absolute truth. I want you to admit you were wrong. Rain thundered around them. Rowan felt like the storm was punishing him. Each drop a reminder of Elena's last night in this castle. The way she begged him to listen. The way he dismissed her warnings. The way her voice broke when he said she brought nothing but unnecessary worry. She had been right. He had been disastrously wrong. A fresh boom of thunder rumbled across the valley. What if she refuses to see me? Rowan whispered, ashamed to even voice the fear. Then you kneel until she does, his grandmother answered without hesitation. Because, my dear boy, this time you are the one without anything to offer. Her words sliced clean through his pride. Rowan finally exhaled, the breath shaking its way out of him. I don't deserve her forgiveness. No, she agreed calmly. You don't. But your people deserve her leadership. He lowered his head. And if she still refuses to return? He asked. Lady Isolde placed a frail hand on his arm. Then you rebuild without her. And you live the rest of your life knowing you lost the only woman who ever loved you without condition. The storm howled around them, drowning out any answer he might have given. But he knew the truth. He needed Elena, not as a wife, not as penance, but because she had been the heart of this land long before disaster came, and he had broken that heart. Now he had to beg her to help him mend what he destroyed, even if she never forgave him, even if she never came back to him, even if she had every right to slam her door in his face, because only one person in the entire kingdom knew how to rebuild what he had let fall. Elena. And Rowan, exhausted, humbled, and shaking, finally whispered the words he should have said years ago. I will go to her. Rowan had never feared the road before. He had marched armies across borders, ridden through storms without faltering, and crossed the valley of Ashmere during wartime with nothing but a blade and arrogance to shield him. But now, as he stood at the edge of his ruined estate with the reins trembling in his hands, he felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Dread. Not of Elena, but of the man he had been when he drove her away. He mounted his horse slowly, every movement heavy with the weight of memories he had tried so hard to bury. The echoes of a loveless marriage haunted him, the sharp words he threw like daggers, the cold silences that stretched across their dining table, the nights she cried quietly thinking he slept. Rowan remembered all of it now, every cruelty he had excused as practicality, Every dismissal he had wrapped in the mantle of duty. But the truth was simpler. He had not loved her then, because he had never known how to love anyone. Not truly. Not vulnerably. And by the time he realized she had been the only softness left in his world, she was gone, walking away without a coin, without a plea, without even looking back. He had expected her to beg. He had expected her to falter. She hadn't. Elena had simply vanished, like a candle snuffed out. And Rowan had let her go. The horse stepped forward, hooves crushing the wet earth as he rode into the long stretch of road leading out of his territory. The disaster that forced him into this journey, the landslide that swallowed half the valley, the famine threatening his people, the collapse of his entire support, felt almost distant now, overshadowed by a single truth beating in his chest. He needed her. Not as a wife, not as a political partner, not even as the woman he should have cherished and didn't. He needed her because she was the only one who ever understood how this land breathed. She knew the farmers, the soil, the trade routes, the harsh winters. She had mended what he ignored, nurtured what he let die, managed what he mismanaged with a grace he never deserved. And now, with everything collapsing around him, the kingdom whispered a truth he hated. Only Elena can save Rowan Ashford. The journey was long, marked by relentless rain and a wind that sliced through his cloak. At every village he passed, he felt eyes on him, suspicion, pity, resentment. Word of his downfall had traveled faster than he expected. One old woman selling herbs muttered just loud enough, "Fool of a duke, lost the only good thing he ever had." Rowan didn't argue. He kept riding. He reached the border of Whitfield, the region Elena had chosen when she left him with nothing but her dignity. Lanterns glowed in the early dusk, lining the main road with warm amber light that contrasted sharply with the storm clouds above. Whitfield was thriving despite the harsh season. The roads were clean, the storehouses full. The people moved with purpose, not fear. Rowan swallowed hard. This prosperity was her doing. She had rebuilt her life from nothing. She hadn't needed him then. She didn't need him now. The realization was a spear to the chest. He reached the village square, where the market was closing for the day. A few merchants recognized him and froze, whispers spreading like wildfire. His reputation had walked ahead of him, and none of them seemed pleased by his presence. "Is it true?" a man murmured. "The Duke finally ruined everything? And now he crawls back to her?" a woman replied with scorn. Rowan ignored them and dismounted, his boots striking the muddy ground with a heavy thud. His heart slammed inside his ribs. There, on the far side of the square, near a stall where lanterns hung from wooden beams, stood Elena. Not broken, not bitter, not diminished. Beautiful, calm, self-possessed. A woman sculpted by survival, not defeat. She wore a simple deep green cloak, her hands delicately arranging herbs into bundles as she spoke softly to a young mother buying remedies. Her posture was straight, her movement steady, her voice warm. Everything about her radiated strength he had never bothered to notice when she had stood in his home. Rowan stepped forward, but the moment Elena lifted her head and her eyes met his, the world seemed to stop. No anger, no joy, no longing, just a stillness colder than winter. And he knew. Winning her back would be harder than saving his dying land. He drew a breath that shook. "Elena." Her expression didn't change. "Your Grace," she said, voice soft and sharp as a blade. "What brings a duke so far from his throne?" And Rowan understood. She owed him nothing. Not forgiveness, not comfort, not even acknowledgement. But he spoke anyway, because desperation broke all pride. "Elena, I need your help. The valley, my people, everything is falling apart." She blinked once, slowly. "And now," she murmured, "you come to the woman you once threw away." Rowan's voice cracked. "Yes." The market fell silent around them, and the true battle, the hardest of his life, had just begun. Rowan did not sleep that night. He sat alone in the great hall of Blackthorn Keep, surrounded by shattered stone, broken beams, and the metallic scent of ash still clinging to the air. The firestorm that had devoured half the stronghold had been extinguished hours ago, yet its memory crackled in his mind, like a curse that refused silence. He stared at his hands, burned, blistered, trembling. The same hands Elena once held between hers with such quiet tenderness, back when he still remembered how to be a husband, when he still knew how to be a man. He had not spoken her name in years, not since the day she walked away from their loveless marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back. No money, no land, no title, nothing of the life she had built beside him. And he let her go. Worse, he watched her go, believing she would eventually crawl back, as countless noble wives did when faced with poverty. But Elena wasn't like other women. She had dignity sharper than steel. And Rowan, blind in his arrogance, had mistaken her silence for weakness. The thunder outside rattled the broken windows, and Rowan buried his face in his hands. His people were without shelter. The winter harvest was lost. The storm had torn down bridges, flooded farmlands, swallowed livestock. Blackthorn was dying. And it was his fault. There was only one person alive who knew the land well enough to restore it. Only one person who knew how to negotiate with the surrounding lords, soothe the terrified villagers, reorganize the granaries, manage the healers, motivate the soldiers, and breathe life back into a dying domain. Only one person with the strength and intelligence he had taken for granted. Elena. The woman who had offered him loyalty and received coldness. The woman who had stood at his side and been ignored. The woman who had given him her devotion. And he had returned nothing. Now he was the one abandoned. By fate, by fortune, by his own failures. He moved through the ruin of his keep with slow, heavy steps, each echo hitched with the weight of regret. Villagers huddled beside the walls, wrapped in blankets, murmuring prayers for warmth. Children whimpered. Elderly men coughed smoke from their lungs. His steward approached him cautiously. "My lord, the people look to you for hope." Rowan swallowed hard. "And what hope can I give them when I no longer believe I deserve their trust?" "The Duchess," the steward whispered. "She would know what to do." Rowan winced. The word Duchess felt like a wound. "Elena is no longer my wife." "But she was our Duchess," the steward insisted, "and the people still remember her with respect, even admiration." Of course they did. Elena had always walked these lands with her sleeves rolled, her hands dirty from helping farmers dig irrigation lines, her skirts soaked from tending to sick cattle, her arms full of firewood for families too weak to gather their own. She had been loved, not for her beauty, though she possessed that too, but for her heart. And he had never deserved her. Lightning flashed, illuminating the devastation. The roof was gone from the west wing. The granary had collapsed. The stone bridge leading into the valley had been swallowed by the river. His people were one step away from famine, another storm, another accident, another misfortune. And they would not survive. He inhaled sharply, the truth striking him with merciless clarity. Even if she never forgave him, even if she slammed the door in his face, even if she had built a life so far from him that he would be no more than a shadow in her memory, she was the only one who could save them. Not because she owed him anything, but because Elena had always cared more for others than for herself. Rowan steadied himself against a pillar, feeling the cold stone bite into his palms. He could not expect kindness. He could not expect a second chance. He could not expect her to listen to him at all. But he would go to her anyway. On foot if he had to. On his knees, if that was the price. For his people. For the village children. For the memory of the woman he had failed. For the hope that redemption, however small, might still exist somewhere in the world. Rain hammered the courtyard as he stepped outside. Thunder rolled over the mountains. The wind cut through his cloak like knives. He tightened the straps of his saddle with shaking hands. He whispered into the storm, not as a duke but as a broken man finally stripped of pride. I will go to her. And with that, Rowan rode into the night, toward the woman who might save his people, and the woman he had once lost through his own blindness. Rowan left the council chamber before anyone could stop him. The corridors of the castle stretched long and hollow before him, shadows flickering along the stone walls like echoes of every mistake he'd ever made. His boots struck the floor with a determination he hadn't felt in years, but underneath that determination lived something colder, heavier, almost unbearable. Fear, not of danger, not of ruin, but of her, of facing the woman he had once called wife, the woman he had failed so thoroughly that even speaking her name now felt like a wound reopening. Elena. He whispered it again as he pushed open the courtyard doors, letting the icy wind slap against his face. The storm rolling over the kingdom had swallowed the sky in charcoal clouds, but he didn't stop. He would walk through fire if that was what it took to reach her. Years ago, he had believed himself a fair man, a reasonable man, a nobleman tasked with duty above all else. When he and Elena married, it was not a marriage born of passion, but of alliance. Still, he had hoped, quietly, foolishly, that affection might come with time. It hadn't. Not because she lacked worth, but because he had been too blind, too rigid, too consumed by expectations to see the treasure placed in his hands. Elena had tried. Gods, she had tried. She had kept his home warm, kept peace among the staff, taught poetry to the village girls in her spare moments, tended to the gardens with soft hands that deserved better than cold indifference. She'd brought color to the halls he kept in grayscale, tenderness to a life he kept locked behind duty, and he gave her nothing in return, until the night he accused her of something she had not done. Until the night he cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and the weight of betrayal slamming behind her as the gates closed. He had been wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. And now the kingdom, his kingdom, had fallen into chaos because of that mistake. A landslide swallowed the mining district, destroying hundreds of homes. Entire families were displaced. Winter approached, panic spread. His council offered ideas, but none workable. But there was one person, one single soul, who had once taken barren land and coaxed life from it. One woman, with enough heart and ingenuity to rebuild what he had let fall apart. Only Elena knew how to restore what was broken. Not because she owed him, not because she still loved him. He knew she probably didn't. Not because she would welcome him with open arms, but because she was Elena, and Elena always helped those in need. Rowan reached the stables, breath sharp in his lungs, hands trembling as he reached for the reins of the fastest horse. His steward rushed forward. "My lord, the storm is too dangerous. At least wait until morning." "No," Rowan said, mounting the horse with a fierceness that startled even him. "Every hour we waste costs another family their home. I should have gone to her years ago. I won't delay now." "But what if she refuses you?" Rowan paused. What if she did? What if she slammed the door in his face? What if she spat every truth he deserved to hear? What if she never wanted to see him again? Every possibility felt like a blade pressed to his throat, but he pushed through it. "If she refuses," he murmured, tightening his grip on the reins, "then I will rebuild the kingdom on my knees if I must." but I will not let pride be the reason more people suffer." The steward lowered his head. Rowan kicked the horse into motion. The gates creaked open. The rain came down in sheets. Lightning split the sky as he rode out into the storm, toward the one woman he had never deserved, yet the only one who could save them now. He didn't know what he would say when he saw her. He didn't know if she would even look at him. He didn't know if she would forgive him or hate him forever. But he would face all of it. Because love, real love, wasn't about deserving. It was about choosing. And after years of choosing everything but her, Rowan finally chose Elena. Rowan left the council chamber before anyone could protest. His cloak brushed the stone floor behind him, heavy with rainwater and failure, but he barely felt the cold. The castle he had once ruled with iron certainty now seemed foreign to him, its corridors too wide, its torches too dim, its servants too quiet. Years ago, when Elena walked away from him, these halls had buzzed with murmurs and gossip. Now they held only the echoes of decisions he should never have made. He reached the stables, and the stable master stumbled awake at the sight of him. "My lord, it's nearly dawn. Should I gather the escort?" "No." Rowan pulled his gloves tight, jaw set like stone. "I ride alone." The man hesitated. "But the roads." "I ride alone," Rowan repeated, and even in his brokenness, the tone of a duke returned, commanding, absolute. Minutes later, hooves struck the wet earth as Rowan rode into the gray morning, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. He didn't care about sleep, or the storm that churned on the horizon, or the kingdom collapsing behind him. He cared about one thing, one person, Elena, the woman he had married for duty and dismissed for pride, the woman who had given him loyalty he never deserved, the woman he had let walk away with nothing but her dignity intact. And now the kingdom needed her more than it needed him. Rain whipped across his face as the sun rose, pale, hesitant, weak. Rowan urged the horse forward, desperate, praying silently that she hadn't changed her name or disappeared into some distant province where he could never reach her again. He remembered the day she left. No screaming, no tears, no dramatic farewell. Just quiet resignation. She stood in the great hall for the last time, the servants watching her like a funeral procession. "If you will not choose me, Rowan," she had said softly, "then I must choose myself." And he, cowardly, blind, convinced he didn't need her, let her go. He didn't know then that she had been the one holding the kingdom together. He didn't know she was the one who managed his estates, soothed political tensions, negotiated trade routes, prevented famine in the eastern villages. He only realized her worth when everything she once handled with grace fell apart. And now, he rode through mud and storm, humbled beyond recognition, terrified that he was already too late. Hours passed, villages blurred by, fields drowned under relentless rain. Rowan's hands ached from gripping the reins, his breath turning ragged, his cloak clinging to him like ice. But he didn't stop, not even when lightning cracked across the sky. He didn't deserve rest, not when Elena had spent years working tirelessly in shadows he never bothered to look at. Not when she had loved him quietly, patiently, until she couldn't anymore. By midday, he reached the valley. Her valley. Elena had chosen a small, forgotten village at the kingdom's edge. Far from nobility, far from courts, far from him. The cottage she'd taken sat near the riverbank, sheltered by old willow trees, smoke rising from its chimney like a soft greeting to the world. Rowan slowed his horse. His hands trembled, his throat tightened. He could lead armies. He could sign decrees. He could stare down foreign kings without fear. But facing Elena again, facing the woman he had broken, that terrified him in ways nothing else could. He dismounted and walked toward the cottage, each step heavier than the last. Rain dripped from his hair, his cloak, his boots. Mud clung to him like guilt. When he reached the door, he hesitated. What could he possibly say? What apology existed for years of neglect? What words could repair the damage he had caused? He raised his hand to knock, and froze. Through the window he saw her, Elena. Hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up, tending to bread in the oven. Peaceful, beautiful, untouchable. She had built a life without him, a quiet, gentle life, and he was about to disrupt it. Rowan closed his eyes. His heart hammered against his ribs. Then, with the last fragment of courage he had left, he knocked on the door. Once, twice, a third time. Inside, footsteps approached. The latch clicked, and Elena opened the door. Her expression didn't shatter, didn't soften, just calm surprise, as if he were nothing more than a ghost she once knew. Rowan swallowed the lump in his throat. "Elena," he whispered, voice breaking. I need your help." Her eyes flickered, pain, memory, and something unreadable. But she didn't answer. She only stepped aside, letting him in. Not out of love, not out of forgiveness, but because the disaster threatening the kingdom was larger than the wounds between them. And Rowan realized, as he crossed the threshold, dripping water onto her wooden floor, that this time, he would not be the one in control. Rowan stood just inside the doorway, dripping onto Elena's clean wooden floor, the smell of fresh bread mingling with rain-soaked wool and cold stone. The door closed behind him with a soft thud that felt strangely final, as if the storm outside had been locked away with his old life. Elena did not rush to offer him a towel. She did not gasp, nor cry, nor demand why he had come. She simply returned to the table, her movements quiet and deliberate, finishing what she had been doing before his arrival, as though the presence of a duke in her small kitchen was no more disruptive than a passing breeze. Rowan stood still, unsure whether he was allowed to breathe. "Sit," she finally said, without turning around. The command was simple, but it held the same confidence she once had in his court, the confidence he ignored. Rowan removed his wet gloves and lowered himself cautiously into the chair opposite her, hands clasped tightly, knuckles pale. Years of speeches, negotiations, court protocols, and he couldn't form a single sentence. Elena broke the silence first. "You said you needed my help," she said, still facing the counter. "Not my forgiveness. I assume you meant the distinction." Rowan flinched. "Yes," he whispered. "I did." Elena finally turned to face him. Her eyes, calm, steady, unbroken, were the hardest thing he had ever looked at. "Then speak, Rowan." Her voice was not cruel, not warm, simply resolute. "Tell me why you're here." He swallowed hard. His pride, once an unyielding fortress, crumbled like wet parchment. "The kingdom is falling," he began. "Falling?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Or being mismanaged?" His gaze dropped. "Both," he admitted. The drought worsened. The eastern lords refused to send grain. Trade routes collapsed after the river flood. And the council cannot agree, she finished for him. They never could. You only noticed now. Her perception cut as sharply as ever. Rowan nodded slowly. "Elena, I thought I understood governance. I thought I commanded loyalty. Balance, stability." He lifted his eyes to hers, raw, pleading. "But all those years, it was you holding everything together, wasn't it?" Silence. Elena looked at him, not with triumph, but with a weariness he had never bothered to see before. "Yes, Rowan," she said quietly. "It was me." She didn't say it to wound him. She said it because it was simply the truth. He bowed his head. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of years of blindness. "Elena," he said, voice cracking. "If the kingdom collapses, people will starve. Families will lose everything." His hands trembled. "I came because I cannot fix what I broke. Not alone." Elena studied him. Not the Duke, not the man who had dismissed her, but the man he had become through failure, through humiliation, through loss. Then she sat across from him, folding her hands neatly on the table. "What exactly are you asking of me?" she asked. Rowan lifted his head. His eyes were red, not from rain, but from regret. "I'm asking you to come back. Not to me," he said quickly, seeing her stiffen, "but to the kingdom." He inhaled shakily. "I need your mind, your strategy, your understanding of the people. A beat. Your leadership." Elena looked at him for a long, unnerving moment. "You're asking me to save what you allowed to crumble." "Yes." His voice was barely audible. "I am." Elena stood and walked to the window. Rain streaked down the glass like silent tears across the landscape. She watched it fall, her posture steady, her breath slow. Rowan waited, each second a knife against his ribs. Finally, Elena spoke. "I will help the kingdom," she said softly, "because innocent people should not suffer for your mistakes." Rowan exhaled, a shuddered, broken release. "But," she added, turning back toward him, "I will not return as your wife." Rowan froze. "And I will not return for you." He nodded. He had expected as much, but hearing it aloud sliced deeper than any sword. "Elena," he said, standing, "whatever you ask, whatever terms you set." "Do not mistake my aid for reconciliation," she interrupted gently. "My heart is not a kingdom you can rebuild." Rowan lowered his head. "I know." A long silence stretched between them, heavy, tender, irreversible. At last, Elena extended her hand. "Then let us begin," she said, not with affection, not with hope for the past, but with a purpose greater than both of them. Rowan took her hand, his lips tightening in something between gratitude and sorrow. And together, unlikely allies, wounded souls, they prepared to face a kingdom on the brink, even though only one of them still carried a broken heart. Elena did not offer him tea. She did not fuss over his soaked cloak, or tremble at the sight of the Duke in her doorway. She simply walked back to her small wooden table and went on slicing bread, as if nothing were remarkable about the man who had once held her future in his hands. Rowan stood there, dripping, unsure if he should sit or kneel. The cottage smelled of rosemary and warm bread. It felt safe in a way his castle never had. Every shelf, every handmade curtain, every gently mended chair had something Elena never had with him. Peace. "Sit," she said at last, not looking at him. Rowan obeyed instantly, taking the chair across from her like a reprimanded schoolboy. She placed a slice of bread before him. Not kindness, not reconciliation, just necessity. "You said the kingdom needs me," she said. "Speak." Rowan swallowed. "The harvest failed. The trade routes collapsed. The council is divided. The eastern villages are starving and refusing to pay taxes. Everything is falling apart," she finished for him. "Of course it is." He closed his eyes. "You kept it together for years. I didn't see it." "You didn't look," she replied calmly. No anger, no raised voice, just the truth he had avoided for too long. "Elena, I came here because I don't know what else to do. I can't fix the kingdom alone." His voice cracked. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I need your wisdom, your steadiness. The people need you." She sat, Folding her hands on the table, she looked at him the way someone examines a wound, not with sentiment, but with clarity. "You did not lose the kingdom when I left, Rowan," she said softly. "You lost yourself." He flinched. She continued, "You spent years believing strength was control, that leadership was distance, that love was weakness. And so you pushed away the one person who would have stood beside you for life." "I know," he whispered, tearing. "Yet here you are," she said, leaning back gently, "finally ready to see what was always in front of you." Rowan bowed his head and broke. He cried, not dramatic sobs, but the silent, shaking kind that come when a man meets the consequences of all he's done. His tears fell onto the wooden table, forming dark circles on the grain. Elena watched, but she did not reach for him. She did not offer comfort. He had forfeited that right. When his breathing steadied, she stood. "I'll help save the kingdom," she said. "Not for you, for the people." Rowan looked up, hopeful, but afraid. "But understand this, Rowan." Her voice held steel. "Whatever you imagine between us, whatever you hope might return, it won't." He felt the words like arrows, but she was not finished. "When I walked away from you, I lost everything but myself, and I rebuilt my life with my own hands. You do not get to claim me now just because you finally realize what you lost." "Elena." He blinked hard. "I know you may never love me again. I want the chance to become the man you deserved." She shook her head gently. "That chance is gone." Silence filled the room. Painful, inevitable, true. But then she did something unexpected. She extended her hand, not in affection, in partnership. "We ride tomorrow," she said, "at first light." Rowan looked at her hand as if it were a lifeline in a violent sea. He took it. Not as her husband, not as her lover. As a leader seeking redemption from the only person wise enough to guide him. And for the first time in years, Elena felt something ease inside her. Not love, not forgiveness, but purpose. This time she would lead beside Rowan not as his wife, but as the woman he should have never underestimated. They left the valley at dawn. Rowan rode beside her, not ahead. He did not bark orders. He did not cloak her in his shadow. He matched her pace, letting her choose the rhythm of their journey. Villagers bowed as they passed. Some recognized Elena and murmured her name with reverence. Others glanced at Rowan with uncertainty, sensing the shift in him. By the time they reached the capital, rumors had already spread. The Duke returned, with the woman who once saved the kingdom. The council chamber erupted the moment they arrived. Arguments, accusations, fear. Elena raised a single hand. Silence fell like a blade. She walked to the central table, spread out maps, trade documents, and numbers she had memorized years ago. With calm precision, she dismantled every failing policy and rebuilt them piece by piece. She assigned roles, corrected tax structures, redirected food supplies, forged alliances, and invoked forgotten treaties. The council watched in awe. Rowan watched in shame and pride. By midnight, the kingdom was no longer crumbling. It was breathing again. When the chamber emptied, Rowan approached her. "You saved them," he said quietly. "I saved myself first." She closed her ledger. "That's the difference." He nodded, humbled. "Elena, I don't expect anything. Not love, not forgiveness. But may I at least thank you?" She paused, studying him. "You may," she said. And that was all. Days turned to weeks. Elena directed reconstruction efforts across the entire realm. Rowan enforced her decisions without question. Together, they restored everything that had been broken, except what lay between them. One evening, as the kingdom celebrated the first signs of prosperity, Rowan joined her on a balcony overlooking the village lights. "Elena," he said softly, "the people look at you now, the way I should have looked at you then." She didn't turn. She didn't need to. "They look at me with trust," she replied. "You only ever looked at me with expectation." He swallowed hard. "I loved you," he whispered. "No," she said. "You loved the idea of what I could be for you. You never asked what I wanted." Her eyes met his, a final quiet truth passing between them. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything. And I accept your apology," she said. For the first time, a soft warmth touched her voice. "But forgiveness," she added, "is not the same as return." A sharp breeze lifted her hair as she stepped back from the balcony edge. "You have grown, Rowan, truly. And I'm proud of the man you're becoming." His breath caught. "But my heart," she said, placing a hand on her chest, "does not belong to you anymore." He closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his cheek. "Elena, will you stay? As advisor? As anything?" She smiled gently, not with bitterness, not with pain, but with peace. "No," she said. "I'll help rebuild the kingdom. But then I will return home." Rowan nodded, devastated but understanding. Her next words were a mercy. "You were my greatest lesson," she said. "Not my greatest love." She began to walk away. "Elena," he called softly. She stopped, but didn't turn. "I will always be grateful for you." She nodded once. "And I will always wish you well," she replied. Then she walked down the corridor, strong, steady, and free. Rowan watched until she disappeared. He did not chase her. He had lost that right long ago. Elena returned to her quiet cottage by the river, where peace waited for her like an old friend. She planted a garden. She wrote letters for the queen. She taught village children to read. Her life was simple, beautiful, hers. Rowan rebuilt the kingdom with the wisdom she left behind. He ruled with humility, not pride, compassion, not coldness, reflection, not arrogance. He became a good ruler. But Elena did not return. Some nights, he looked toward the valley, wishing he could go to her. But he never did. Because love, true love, meant letting her choose her own happiness. And she had. Elena never remarried. Not out of fear, not out of heartbreak, but because she finally understood. Her wholeness was never meant to be found in someone else. The kingdom thrived. Peace returned. And Elena's name lived on, not as a wife abandoned, not as a duchess unappreciated, but as the woman who saved a kingdom and saved herself. A love story not about reunion, but about release. A tragedy rewritten as strength. A heart broken, then reborn stronger than before. And she never looked back.